The Valori Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever truly challenged their power. They were ancient beings with scales the color of burnt copper and eyes that glowed like dying stars, and they had crushed 100 civilizations beneath their clawed feet. When humanity first reached the stars, the Valori watched with mild curiosity as these strange, soft creatures built their little colonies on distant worlds. The humans were weak and primitive and hardly worth noticing, but they had one quality that troubled the Empire. They refused to kneel. The colony on Kepler 442b was small, with only 50,000 humans living in domed cities surrounded by red forests and purple mountains. They grew food in the alien soil and built schools for their children and dreamed of a future among the stars. When the Valori demanded their surrender, the colonists sent back a single-word message that echoed across the galaxy: "No High Executor." Thalvex received this message in his throne room aboard the Imperial flagship, and his scales rippled with something between amusement and anger. He was the most powerful being in the known universe, and these primitive apes dared to refuse him. He decided then that humanity needed a lesson and that the entire galaxy would watch it happen. His soldiers descended on Kepler 442b like a swarm of metal locusts, and they rounded up the colonists with brutal efficiency. Thalvex did not want warriors or leaders for his demonstration, because killing the strong proved nothing. He wanted someone innocent and someone ordinary, and someone whose death would break the human spirit forever. They found her in the agricultural center with dirt on her hands and seeds in her pockets. Maya Chun was 19 years old, and she had come to Kepler 442b to help the colony grow food in the strange alien soil. She was the daughter of a schoolteacher from a small town in what used to be called China, and she had never held a weapon in her life. She had brown eyes and black hair, and a smile that made even the grumpiest colonists feel a little better about their hard lives on this distant world. When the Valori soldiers grabbed her, she did not scream or beg, because she understood immediately what was happening. She had heard stories about imperial executions, and she knew that her death was meant to be a message. The soldiers dragged her to a platform in the center of the colony, where cameras had been set up to broadcast across the entire galaxy. 847 billion viewers would watch what happened next, and every single one of them would remember it for the rest of their lives. Thalvex stood before the cameras in his ceremonial armor, with Maya kneeling in chains behind him. His voice boomed across 1,000 worlds as he spoke. Let this human serve as a lesson to all who would resist the Empire. He gestured at Maya with one clawed hand. This creature is nothing, and her species is nothing, and their defiance is nothing. Today, the galaxy will watch us erase this insignificant life, and tomorrow, no one will remember her name. He turned to face Maya, and his lips pulled back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. Do you have any final words, little human? Maya lifted her head, and the bruises on her face were dark against her pale skin, but her eyes were clear and steady. She did not look at Thalvex because he was not important. She looked directly into the camera, and she spoke to every living being watching across the stars. My name is Maya Chun. Her voice was calm and quiet, but somehow it carried weight that made even the High Executor pause. I am 19 years old. She took a breath and smiled, and it was not a smile of fear or sadness, but something else entirely. I taught children how to grow tomatoes in alien soil. The cameras captured every detail of her face and transmitted it across the galaxy in perfect clarity. I am not special. She said each word slowly and deliberately, as if she wanted every syllable to be remembered. I am not a warrior. She paused, and her smile grew wider. I am just human. And then she said the words that would echo through history and ignite a fire that would burn down an empire. And that is enough? Thalvex felt something cold move through his chest as he looked at this small, fragile creature who showed no fear in the face of death. For a moment, he hesitated because something in her eyes made him feel like the prey instead of the predator. But he was the high executor of the Valori Empire, and he had killed millions, and one human girl could not make him afraid. He raised his plasma weapon and fired. The bolt of superheated energy struck Maya Chen in the chest and ended her life in an instant. She did not scream, and she did not fall with her eyes closed in terror. She fell still smiling and still looking into the camera and still utterly unafraid. The broadcast cut to static 3 seconds later, but those 3 seconds had already changed everything. Thalvek stood over the body and waited for the feeling of triumph that always came after an execution. It did not come. Instead, he felt a strange unease crawling up his spine, like something terrible had just been set in motion. Across the galaxy, 847 billion viewers sat in stunned silence. They had expected to see a human break and beg and die in terror like so many species before them. Instead, they had watched a 19-year-old girl face the most powerful empire in history and smile on Earth in the deep bunkers beneath the mountains. The military commanders watched the broadcast, and something ancient and fierce awakened in their hearts. On Threx Prime, where the reptilian Threxians had been slaves for 600 years, they watched and remembered what courage looked like. On the ocean world of Delphis, where the aquatic Delphinians had been harvested for their healing blood, they watched and felt something they had not felt in centuries. Hope Maya Chen was dead, and her body lay cooling on an alien world millions of light years from the planet where she was born. But her words were still echoing across the stars, and they would never stop. I am just human, and that is enough. The Valori Empire had wanted to teach the galaxy about fear. Instead, they had taught it something far more dangerous. They had taught it that even the smallest voice can shake the foundations of tyranny, and now the galaxy was listening. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo sat alone in the darkness of her private quarters deep beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched the video for the 47th time. She was 63 years old, with gray hair, cut short, and scars on her face from battles most people did not know had been fought. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for a war that everyone told her would never come. Now it was here. The video played on the screen in front of her, and she watched Maya Chan speak those final words with that impossible smile on her young face. I am just human, and that is enough. Sarah paused the video and stared at the frozen image of the girl she had never met. She noted the timestamp in the corner of the screen and the viewing count. Below it, the number had been climbing since the broadcast ended 6 hours ago, and it had not stopped. 47 billion, not million but billion with a B. The entire human population of Earth and its colonies was only 12 billion, which meant that this number represented something unprecedented. Alien species were watching, and they were not just watching once, but over and over again. Sarah opened her communication channels and saw reports flooding in from every corner of human space. The Threxians on Threx Prime had translated Maya's words into their own language and were spreading them through underground networks. The Delphinians on Delphis had stopped working in the processing facilities where they were forced to give their blood for imperial medicine. The insectoid cricks on a dozen mining worlds had begun refusing to enter the tunnels. Species that had been silent for centuries were suddenly talking, and they were all saying the same thing. The humans did not break. Sarah had known this day would come eventually because she had studied the Valori Empire for 40 years. She knew that their power was built on fear, and that fear only worked as long as everyone believed resistance was impossible. Maya Chan had just proven that it was not impossible. She had faced death with a smile, and now 47 billion beings across the galaxy were wondering if they could do the same. Sarah pressed a button on her console and spoke into the communicator. This is Admiral Okonkwo, and I am authorizing Operation 47 effective immediately. The name had come to her in that moment as she watched the viewing count climb. It seemed fitting. Her message went out to hidden bases on 100 worlds where human soldiers had been waiting for this moment. their entire lives on Mars. The underground factories that had been building weapons in secret for 20 years powered up their assembly lines. In the asteroid belt, ships that looked like mining vessels revealed their true nature as heavily armed warships. On Luna, the training facilities emptied as soldiers who had been preparing for decades finally received their orders. Humanity had known since first contact that the Valori would eventually try to conquer them. They had seen what happened to other species that refused to submit, and they had decided that when their time came, they would not go quietly for 20 years. They had smiled and pretended to be weak and primitive while building an arsenal that would shock the galaxy. Maya-chan had given them the spark they needed to light the fuse. But humanity was not the only species preparing for war. On Threx Prime, an old warrior named Kreth watched the video on a hidden screen and felt his blood run hot for the first time in decades. The Threxians had been a proud race, once with scales like emeralds and claws that could tear through metal. The Empire had broken them 600 years ago and taught them that resistance meant death. Kreth had grown up being told that his ancestors were foolish for fighting and that submission was the only path to survival. Now he watched a human girl smile at death and realized that his entire life had been a lie. He gathered his clutch mates in the darkness of their dwelling and spoke words that had not been spoken on Threx Prime for generations. It is time to remember what we are. Across the ocean world of Delphis, a Delphinian named Wavesinger floated in the processing facility, where she had spent her entire life giving blood for the Empire. She was ancient by her people's standards, and she remembered a time before the Valori came when her species swam free in the endless depths. The video of Maya-chan played on the facility screens because the Imperial overseers wanted the workers to see what happened to those who resisted. They did not understand what they had done. Wavesinger watched the human girl smile, and something broke inside her. Not her spirit, but the chains that had bound it for 300 years. She began to sing in the old language that her grandmother had taught her in secret, and other Delphinians heard her song and joined their voices to hers. The overseers did not understand the words, but they felt something change in the water around them, something dangerous. In the Imperial Palace on Valor Prime High Executor, Thalvex received reports from across his domain and felt the first stirrings of true fear. Protests on Threx Prime and work stoppages on Delphis and strange signals from a dozen other worlds. All because of one human girl who had refused to be afraid. He ordered his generals to crush the unrest with overwhelming force, but the reports kept coming, faster than he could respond to them. The viewing count on the execution video had passed 50 billion, and it showed no signs of slowing down. Thalvex had ruled the Empire for 300 years, and he had never seen anything like this. He had killed millions and destroyed entire civilizations, and no one had ever reacted this way. What was different about this human girl, and why did her death matter more than all the others? He watched the video again and again, searching for answers. But all he found was that smile and those words, "I am just human, and that is enough." He finally understood his mistake as he sat alone in his throne room. He had wanted to show the galaxy that humans could be broken like everyone else. Instead, he had shown them that humans could face death without fear. And now every enslaved species in his empire was asking themselves a dangerous question. If the humans are not afraid, then why should we be? The answer was spreading like fire through dry grass, and Thalvex knew that no amount of force could stop it. He had not killed Maya-chan. He had made her immortal. The first blow against the Empire came from the place where Maya-chan had died. The colonists of Kepler 442b had spent the 3 days since her execution pretending to prepare their surrender. Imperial ships hung in orbit above their world, and soldiers patrolled their streets, and everyone expected them to break. They did not break. Governor James Whitfield was a quiet man with gentle hands who had spent most of his life growing crops and raising children. He had never thought of himself as a warrior, but he had watched Maya die, and something had changed inside him. She was just a girl who taught children to grow tomatoes, and she had faced the Empire without fear. If she could do that, then so could he. The colonists worked in secret to connect their settlement's fusion reactors to the geothermal vents beneath the planet's surface. They moved carefully and quietly, because one mistake would alert the Imperial soldiers watching them. On the third day after Maya's death, the Imperial Fleet Commander sent a message demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. Governor Whitfield stood in the control room of the settlement with 50,000 souls, depending on his next words. He thought about Maya and her smile and her final message to the galaxy. Then he opened a communication channel to the entire planet and spoke. My friends, we came to this world to build something new and something beautiful. We planted seeds in alien soil and watched them grow, and we dreamed of a future among the stars. The Empire wants to take that future from us, and they want to make us kneel and beg for mercy. Governor Whitfield looked at the faces around him and saw no fear, only determination. Maya Chen was 19 years old, and she smiled at death. She showed the galaxy what humans are made of, and now it is our turn to show them. He pressed the button that would seal their fate. We are just human, and that is enough. The explosion was visible from orbit as the fusion reactors detonated in a chain reaction that vaporized the settlement and everything within 100 miles. The Imperial fleet watched in stunned disbelief as 50,000 humans chose death over surrender. Governor Whitfield's final transmission reached every corner of the galaxy before the flames consumed him. We do not kneel, and we do not break, and we do not forget. Remember Maya Chun. The destruction of Kepler 442b sent shockwaves through the Empire that went far beyond the physical devastation. Species that had been considering rebellion now saw proof that humans would rather die than submit. If these soft, weak creatures could face annihilation with such courage, then what excuse did anyone else have for remaining in chains on Threx Prime? The old warrior Kreth had been gathering followers for days. They met in underground caverns where Imperial censors could not find them, and they spoke of ancient traditions long forbidden. The Threxians had claws and teeth and scales that could turn aside blades, and they had forgotten how to use them. Kreth reminded them. When the Imperial garrison on their world received orders to increase security, the Threxians were ready. They struck at dawn with a fury that their ancestors would have been proud of. Claws tore through armor and teeth crushed bone, and for the first time in 600 years, Threxian war cries echoed across their homeworld. The battle lasted 12 hours, and when it was over, the Imperial flag had been torn down from every building. Kreth stood in the central square of the capital city, with green blood dripping from his claws, and spoke to his people. We are Threxians, and that is enough. Remember Maya Chun. On Delphus, the Delphinians have been singing there ancient songs since the execution broadcast. Wave Singer led them from the processing facilities into the open ocean where the Imperial overseers could not follow. The Valori had never understood how dangerous the Delphinians could be in there. Natural element. They were about to learn when Imperial ships came to force the workers back to the facilities. They found that the gentle creatures they had been harvesting for centuries had teeth of their own. The Delphinians could dive to depths that would crush any Valori vessel, and they could hold their breath for hours while they waited for their enemies. They dragged the Imperial ships down into the darkness one by one, and the screams of the drowning soldiers echoed through the water. Wave Singer sang a new song as her people reclaimed their world, and the words spread across every ocean. We are Delphinians, and that is enough. Remember Maya Chun across the Empire. The same scenes repeated on world after world. The insectoid Crix collapsed the mines they had been forced to dig for generations and buried their oppressors alive. The gaseous nebulans on the cloud world of Stratos ignited their own atmosphere to destroy the orbital platforms that had controlled them. The crystalline Lithians on the barren moon of Praxis shattered themselves into 1,000,000 shards that tore through Imperial facilities like glass rain. Each rebellion was different, but they all shared one thing. They all invoked the name of a 19-year-old human girl who had smiled at death. High Executor Thalvex watched his empire begin to crumble and ordered his fleets to crush the uprisings with maximum force. But there were too many fires burning and not enough water to put them out every time. His soldiers killed rebels, more rose to take their place, and every execution only added fuel to the flames. He had spent 12,000 years building an empire based on fear, and in 3 days, a dead human girl had destroyed its foundations. His advisors came to him with reports of human warships emerging from hidden bases across the galaxy. They had been preparing for this moment for decades, and now they were joining forces with the rebelling species. An alliance was forming, and at its head was a human admiral named Sarah Okonkwo. She called her fleet the 47 in honor of the viewing count that had changed everything. Thalvex looked at the strategic display showing red markers spreading across his domain like a disease. He finally understood that this was not a rebellion. This was a reckoning. The Battle of Valor Prime began on a day that would be remembered for 10,000 years. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the enemy fleet arranged before her. The Valori had gathered every ship they had left to defend their homeworld, and the display showed thousands of vessels bristling with weapons. Her own fleet was smaller, but it was not just human anymore. Threxian warships with hulls like green scales flew beside sleek Delphinian cruisers. Designed to operate in vacuum like they operated in water, Kriegs carriers hummed with the buzzing of 1,000,000 warrior insects, and Nebulan vessels glowed with barely contained energy. 43 species had answered the call, and they had all come to end 12,000 years of tyranny. Sarah's flagship was called the Maya Chen, and it was the ugliest ship in the fleet. Human engineers had built it in secret over 15 years using technology they had stolen and invented and improvised. It broke at least 7 laws of physics that the Valori considered unbreakable, and it carried enough firepower to crack a moon. Sarah loved it like a child. She opened the communication channel to her fleet and spoke words that would echo through history. My friends, we have come a long way to reach this moment. Some of us have been slaves for centuries, and some of us have been hiding and waiting for decades. We are different species from different worlds, with different bodies and different minds. But today we share one thing in common. She paused and looked at the image of Maya Chen displayed on every screen in the fleet. A 19-year-old girl showed us what courage looks like, and now we are going to show the Empire what that courage can do. They wanted the galaxy to watch when they killed her. Sarah smiled, and it was a cold and terrible thing. Let them watch now. The fleet surged forward, and the greatest battle in galactic history began. The Valori had 12,000 years of military tradition, and their tactics had been refined through countless wars. They expected the Allied fleet to fight like every other enemy they had ever faced. They were wrong. Human ships did not retreat when they were damaged, but instead accelerated toward the enemy and detonated their reactors at point-blank range. Threxian warriors launched themselves from their ships in nothing but armored suits and tore through. Valori hulls with their bare claws Delphinian vessels dove through the enemy formation with impossible agility, using maneuvers that should have torn them apart. The Valori tactical computers could not predict these attacks because they were not logical. No sane species would sacrifice themselves so readily, and no rational commander would waste ships on suicide charges. But the Allied fleet was not fighting for logic or rationality. They were fighting for vengeance and freedom and the memory of a girl who smiled at death. High Executor Thalvex commanded the defense from his palace on the planet below. He watched the battle unfold with growing horror as his numerical advantage melted away. The Allied fleet took terrible losses, but they kept coming, and every ship that fell was replaced by 2 more. filled with beings who no longer feared death on day 3 of the battle. The Valori first line collapsed, and the Allies pushed through to the inner defense perimeter. On day 7, the orbital platforms fell, and the Allied fleet began landing. Troops on the planet's surface. On day 12, Thalvac sent a message to Admiral Okonkwo offering unconditional surrender. She read his message on the bridge of the Maya Chen as fires burned across the Valori capital visible from orbit. Her response was broadcast on every frequency so that the entire galaxy could hear it. You wanted the galaxy to watch, and they are still watching. Finish it. The final assault on the Imperial Palace lasted 5 more days. Valori soldiers fought with the desperation of those who knew their entire civilization was ending. They had been masters of the galaxy for 12,000 years, and they could not accept that it was over. But the Allied troops were led by beings who had been slaves for centuries, and they fought with the fury of the finally free. Kreth, the Threxian warrior, led the breach of the palace gates with his claws dripping Valori blood. Wave Singer's people flooded the lower levels through the water systems, drowning defenders in hallways they thought were safe. Human soldiers pushed through the throne room doors on day 17 and found Thalvac waiting for them. The High Executor sat on his ancient throne and looked at the enemies surrounding him with something like confusion. "I do not understand," he said as Admiral Okonkwo walked toward him with a weapon in her hand. "She was one girl, and she was nothing, and I killed millions before her. Why did her death matter more than all the others?" Sarah stopped in front of the throne and looked at the being who had ordered Maya's execution. "Because you showed the galaxy that she was not afraid. Every species you ever conquered believed that fear was the only response to your power. Maya proved them wrong, and once they knew it was possible to face you without fear, they realized they did not have to be afraid anymore." Thalvac stared at her with his dying star eyes. "I made her into a symbol." "No," Sarah said, and her voice was hard as stone. "She made herself into a symbol, and you were just too arrogant to see it." She raised her weapon and then lowered it. "But you will not die today, because death would be too easy. You are going to watch your empire fall, and you are going to answer for every life you took." Guards came forward and put chains on the High Executor's wrists as they led him away. Sarah stood in the empty throne room and looked at the ceiling where murals depicted 12,000 years of Valori conquest. Tomorrow those murals would be gone and something new would be painted in their place. She thought about Maya Chun and wondered if the girl had known what her death would start. Probably not. She was just human after all, and that had been enough. 1 year after the fall of the Valori Empire, they rebuilt the colony on Kepler 442b. The explosion that Governor Whitfield had triggered had left nothing but a crater where the settlement once stood. But humans are stubborn creatures, and they do not abandon the places where their people died. New domes rose from the ashes, and new gardens were planted in the alien soil. Children played in streets named after heroes and learned songs about the girl who had changed the galaxy. In the center of the rebuilt colony, they constructed a statue that could be seen from orbit. It stood 300 feet tall, and it was made from metal salvaged from destroyed Valori warships. The statue depicted Maya Chun as she had been in life, with dirt on her hands and a gentle smile on her face. She was looking up at the stars the way she must have looked on the day she first arrived on this distant world. At the base of the statue, they carved her final words in every known language in the galaxy. "My name is Maya Chun. I am 19 years old. I taught children how to grow tomatoes in alien soil. I am not special. I am not a warrior. I am just human, and that is enough." Below those words, they added one more line, 47. 0. The number of beings who had watched her die and decided to stop being afraid. The dedication ceremony brought visitors from across the galaxy. Ships from 43 species filled the sky above Kepler 442b, and their crews walked the streets of the new colony in wonder. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo stood before the statue in her formal uniform with medals on her chest that she had never wanted to earn. She was no longer an admiral because the war was over. The Galactic Coalition had named her Chancellor and given her the task of building something new from the ashes of the old empire. It was a job she had never asked for, but she would do it because someone had to. Behind her stood representatives from every species that had fought for freedom. Kreth, the Threxian warrior, had become the leader of his people, and his green scales gleamed in the light of the alien sun. Wavesinger floated in a special water tank designed to let her attend ceremonies on land. Delegates from the Krix and the Nebulans and the Lithians and dozens of other species filled the plaza around the statue. They had all come to honor a girl none of them had ever met. Sarah stepped up to the podium and looked out at the crowd of humans and aliens standing together. She had prepared a speech, but the words she had written seemed wrong. Now instead she spoke from her heart. When I was a young officer, I was taught that war is about ships and weapons and tactics I spent decades preparing for. A conflict that everyone told me we could never win. The Valari had 12,000 years of power behind them, and we were just a young species, barely crawling out of our cradle. She looked up at the statue of Maya and felt tears forming in her eyes. Then, a 19-year-old girl taught me that I was wrong about everything. War is not about ships and weapons and tactics. It is about will and courage, and the refusal to accept that evil is stronger than good. Maya-chan never fired a weapon, and never led an army, and never commanded a fleet. She was a teacher's daughter who liked growing tomatoes and helping children learn. The crowd was silent, and every eye was fixed on the Chancellor. But she won this war because she showed the galaxy something it had forgotten. She showed us that one person facing the worst evil can still choose to be brave. That fear is a choice, and we do not have to make it. That the smallest voice can shake the foundations of tyranny if it speaks. The truth without flinching. Sarah turned to face the statue and raised her fist in salute. The Valori Empire ruled for 12,000 years. It took us 2 years to tear it down. Not because we were stronger, and not because we were smarter, but because when they tried to break us, we refused to break. She turned back to the crowd. I never met Maya Chun, but I know what she would want us to remember. She would not want us to worship her as a hero or build monuments to war. She would want us to grow tomatoes and teach children and build a galaxy where no one has to be afraid. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to take the weapons we built and turn them into tools. We are going to take the anger we felt and transform it into compassion. We are going to prove that humanity is worth something, not just because we can fight, but because we can create. Sarah raised her voice, and it carried across the plaza and up to the stars. We are just human, and that is enough. Crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and the sound echoed across the planet. 43 species raised their voices together, and for one perfect moment, the galaxy was united. High above the planet, a ship carrying prisoners to their trials passed through the system. In one of the cells, High Executor Thalvex looked out a small window and saw the statue of Maya Chung rising from the planet below. He could not hear the cheering, but he could imagine it. He had killed her to teach the galaxy about fear, and instead she had taught it about hope. He would spend the rest of his very long life answering for his crimes, and every day he would remember the girl who smiled at death. On the surface, Maya's parents stood at the base of the statue and touched the words carved into the stone. They had traveled across the galaxy to see what their daughter had become. Her mother wept, and her father held her close and together. They read the words their child had spoken in her final moments. I am just human, and that is enough. They had raised her to be kind and curious and brave. And they had never imagined that those simple qualities would change the galaxy. But that was what humans did. They took small things and made them enormous. They took ordinary people and made them legends. And they refused to stay broken, no matter how many times the universe tried to shatter them as the sun set over. Kepler 442b, the statue of Maya Chun, cast a long shadow across the colony she had died to protect children who would grow up free, played in the gardens she had helped plant. And somewhere out among the stars, the galaxy she had saved continued to spin, full of life and hope and the stubborn courage of beings who had learned the most. Important lesson of all, you do not have to be special to change everything. You just have to be brave enough to try.